They say people show their true selves when no one's watching, and I guess that night, in the middle of a blizzard, with no one but the wind and a dying engine for company, I found out who I still was. It was late December, and I was halfway through a haul to Northern Ridge, a quiet little town in Pennsylvania that only shows up on old trucker maps and Christmas postcards. I'd driven that route 100 times, but this storm wasn't like anything I'd seen in years. Visibility dropped to maybe 5 feet. Snow came down like the sky was mad at us, and the temperature sank so fast my coffee froze solid in the cup holder. They were calling it a 100-year storm. But deadlines don't care about snow. Freight had to move, and I had promised delivery by morning. Name's Frank Delaney. I'm 62, ex-Marine, Logistics Corps. I got out in '05 after a supply route accident tore up my right leg. Nothing dramatic, no medals, no headline, just a bad axle, a sharp ditch, and 3 surgeries that told me my convoy days were over. Since then, I've been hauling commercial freight. Quiet, steady work. Every route the same. Drive, unload, sip burnt diner coffee, head home. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the wheels turning. That night, I was easing through mile marker 143 when the state police shut the highway down. A dozen rigs pulled onto the shoulder, hazards blinking in the snow like a row of grounded aircraft. We all knew the drill: idle the engine for heat, crack a thermos, wait it out. My CB crackled with the usual storm chatter, road closures, jackknifed trailers, and then something different. A voice said, "There's some old man walking by the median thin jacket, no gloves. Been out there 20 minutes. Another voice cut in, sharp, "Stay in your rigs. Last thing we need is another body out there." I looked out through the frost-glazed windshield. Sure enough, maybe 20 yards off, I saw a figure hunched in the whiteout, barely moving. I don't know what made me reach for my coat and boots. Maybe it was habit, maybe instinct. Or maybe it was the memory of a buddy of mine who died in a winter exercise back in '89 because his unit thought he'd gotten ahead of the group only he'd fallen behind. Either way, I zipped my parka to the chin, pulled on my wool gloves, and stepped into the storm. The wind hit like a wall. Every step felt like I was wading through wet cement, my bad legs screaming with every push. But I made it to him. Man was in his late 60s, face white as the snow around us, lips purple. He looked at me with half-dead eyes, but gave the faintest nod. "Come on, sir," I said, gripping his arm. "You're not dying tonight." I dragged him back to my truck, got him inside, wrapped him in an emergency blanket, and poured the hottest coffee I had. Didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. The man barely spoke, but when he finally thawed out enough to talk, his words were clipped, calm, unmistakably military. He reached into his jacket and handed me a scratched metal ID card. Admiral Thomas R. Cade, United States Navy. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. Reflexes kicked in. I sat a little straighter. He explained that he'd been on his way to a memorial for a fellow officer. His driver got sick. He tried to make the last stretch solo. GPS failed, and his rental skidded into a ditch. He'd been walking 2 hours in sub-zero wind. If I hadn't stopped. He didn't say it, but I saw it in his eyes. He knew how close he'd come. We didn't talk much after that. He slept in the cabin while I stayed up, keeping the heat running, refilling his thermos, checking the weather. By morning, the plows had cleared 1 lane. I offered to drive him to the nearest police outpost. He accepted with a quiet nod. When we got there, he shook my hand with both of his and said, "You didn't just help a man last night. You saved an old sailor's final mission." I didn't think much of it after that. I had deliveries to make, schedules to keep. I dropped him off, saluted out of habit, and got back on the road. 3 weeks passed. Snow melted. Life went on. Until one Tuesday morning, I was painting the new porch railing on my old ranch house, and 6 Navy Jeeps rolled down my cul-de-sac. It wasn't subtle. They lined up perfectly along the curb. A uniformed officer got out, walked up to my gate, and asked, "Is this the residence of Mr. Frank Delaney?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and said, "Yeah, that's me." He saluted. "We're here under direct orders from Admiral Thomas Cade. He's requested a full restoration of your home's heating system, roof, and electrical wiring." I blinked. "That's really not necessary." "Sir," the officer said, his exact words were, "This man kept me alive without knowing who I was. The Navy takes care of its own, and anyone who helps one of ours becomes one of ours." Before I could say another word, they were already unloading gear, ladders, boxes of insulation, ductwork, shingles. Over the next 3 days, my quiet house became a full-blown construction zone. Engineers in Navy uniforms replaced my ancient furnace with a system so quiet I had to check twice to make sure it was running. They rewired every socket, replaced rotten panels on the roof, and painted the exterior to match the original trim. Neighbors peeked through curtains, mouths half open. Miss Carter from 2 houses down brought over a pie on day 2. Said, "I had no idea you were a war hero." "I'm not," I told her. "I just picked up a guy in a snowstorm." She smiled and said, exactly what my Charlie would have done. By day 3, kids were sitting on my porch rail watching the crew work. One boy, maybe 10, asked, "Are you like a Navy spy?" I laughed. "No, kid. Just a truck driver with good boots." That afternoon, the team leader handed me a plaque. Wooden, beautifully carved. It read, "Veteran Shelter Honored by Honor Itself." I didn't know what to say. I still don't. I hung it next to the front door. Sunlight catches it in the morning. I kept driving routes after that. Didn't tell the story much. Not because I was hiding it, just didn't feel like it was mine to brag about. But people started hearing about it. Notes appeared in my mailbox. Handwritten ones. From veterans, from widows, from folks who said things like, "Thank you for reminding us there's still good out there." The local VFW invited me to speak. I declined. I hate speeches. Always have. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. The voice on the other end said, "Corporal Delaney, this is Admiral Cade." I sat a little straighter. "Yes, sir. I heard you declined the Washington invitation. I appreciate the honor, sir, but I don't need a medal for doing what's right." He paused, then said, "Would you accept a compromise? No cameras, no press, just a handshake and a word of thanks. At your local VFW." I agreed. A week later, he came in person. Full dress uniform. The place went silent when he walked in. He sat beside me, took my hand, and said, "There's no just in service. You moved without orders, in a storm, and saved a life. That's the kind of action that built the backbone of this country." He handed me a small medal, not official, not listed anywhere. Just something he'd had made. The inscription said, "For reminding us what matters most." I keep it in the glove box of my truck. Not because I need to see it, but because some days, when the world feels cold and cynical and tired, I like knowing it's there. Proof that what you do when no one's watching, it still counts. And if you've ever stepped up when no one else would, even when it was inconvenient, even when it felt like you were the only one who cared, then you understand. Let me ask you this. Have you ever helped someone without knowing who they were, only to learn they'd once helped an entire nation? What would you have done in that snowstorm? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't the ones that make the news, the ones that stay quietly with us, shaping how we show up for one another when it matters most. And if you believe that no act of kindness is ever wasted, share this story. Someone out there might be waiting for a reason to act with courage. And maybe this is it.